I thought if God could have a human presence, it would be Bill.
I consider him one of the saints that I've met.
The gentle giant in a brown tunic.
He was a good man. He was a good man.
The ward team are being very supportive, not only of Richie and his wishes, but also of me. It is the touch, the embrace that one receives that is of more value than the spoken word. For there are no words, only the comfort of silence that understands and accepts the uniqueness of our differing pains and how they are coped with as we make this journey together in our separate ways.
I was born in Canada in June 1927, immediately put into a foster home, and about 5 to 6 years later into a foster family, and in British Columbia, and brought up in a very strict Victorian manner. And went to school till I was about 14. My foster father then died, and by then the foster family had started a home for the elderly, and I worked there till I was about 21.
He was a person who'd been deeply traumatised in his own life by the experiences of his childhood and youth. I think it wasn't an accident that he wasn't an exile here in England.
That's from Canada.
From Canada.
Yes.
But he didn't block that off. I mean, he was able to use his own experience of marginalisation to be with marginalised and rejected people.
I suspect my caring career began working in my parents' nursing home for the elderly in British Columbia for about 7 years as an untrained nurse. Then I left that for quite some time and did several jobs. And then had an experience in Calcutta, which more or less suggested I should go back to caring.
I first came across him in about 1968. He was a nurse at St Clement's Hospital in Mile End in Bow, and I lived just across the road. I was the vicar of St Botolph, Aldgate, and we became friends, and I realised what marvellous work he was doing.
Bill came as director of Centrepoint. That sounds very grand, but Centrepoint only had 2 staff and had very little money. And I think Bill's time at St Anne's showed his enormous ministry to and sympathy with the homeless young, because Centrepoint was a night shelter and to be a charity to help those who landed on the street.
It was very scruffy and very rough, and Bill was up there in this solitary little room, rather untidy, but living this life of a contemplative, almost a contemplative monk in the heart of Soho.
Bill was a sort of worker priest. He was a nurse, as you know, at St Clement's. Then he wanted to be a Franciscan, and so he tested his vocation with the Society of St Francis.
I think he found the Society of St Francis a bit too precious, although they're very rooted and have a wonderful history of work with the poor, because they also had places sort of out in the country, and that wasn't Bill's milieu.
It was part of, I think, his journey, which took him round Europe, certainly, to find where and how his really unique gifts could be used. And we know where that ended, in Earl's Court.
The Reaching Out project in Earl's Court was way ahead of its time.
Of course, he started the Reaching Out, as he called it, in Earl's Court, to reach out to people who were mentally ill or people who were prostitutes or people with HIV and AIDS.
I think he had one had a sense with him that he had been on the edge in various ways himself, and he was comfortable being with people who were also on the edge of society, or on the edge of their emotion.
I knew that he'd established at St Cuthbert's Centre, or in the hall, at the back of the hall, there was a little kitchenette. Coffee and sandwiches and cakes and that sort of thing for homeless people.
Bill was so good at listening, being non-judgmental. He would, at 1 o'clock in the morning, go out onto the streets, walk the streets.
Bill just hanging around, in a way, just being there on the streets, in the bars, whatever, not consciously looking for anything, almost cruising around hospital wards. Yes, just, probably following his intuition a bit, or just subtly, almost unconsciously aware that this person was in distress or needed something, and not evaluating whether this person was worth his time, just giving his time. And the people who were around, especially those who didn't have a secure social network or whatever, encountering Bill must have been a remarkable experience.
There is now a danger that has become a threat to us all. It is a deadly disease and there is no known cure.
A lot of people, in my experience, contracted AIDS or made contact with the virus without any knowledge of the danger when they made love to someone else or went home with someone else or whatever the arrangement was. And when the first people began to pass away, neither the medical establishment and certainly not us in the pastoral field, we hadn't a clue what was happening.
We must remember that in the 80s, when it first hit England, right, the stigma was horrendous, absolutely horrendous.
We had about 22 beds, and it wasn't uncommon to have 12 people that were dying. Young men who were my age, a lot under 30, and the saddest of stories, so mostly gay men, and I would say probably 50% had no contact with their families because their families had they'd come out and their parents had thrown, kind of disowned them.
A number of us who were Christian were concerned at the lack of response of the mainstream churches to this new disease, and in those late 70s, early 80s, we knew very little about it.
Young gay people, young gay men in any case, were marginalised all over again because of the danger and the ignorance of AIDS. And Bill sort of swept all that aside. He was there for those who were there.
Discovered anything further, but I'm coming out okay. I seem to be building up more strength and coping better than I have in the past.
Well, you're certainly looking well.
Bill's with us a kind of simple humanity of not flinching, just holding a hand, embracing. These meant a lot because they were both emotionally, psychologically strengthening, but they were also giving a very positive message out to the wider world that when people are suffering, you hug them close. You don't. Some of the horror stories we heard about, even some of the hospitals in the early days, people wouldn't want to bring food trays into rooms where people had AIDS. So everything about the way he worked just completely rejected that.
Even when my best friend died of AIDS, my best friend's family was so unaccepting of the whole picture. Bill was, I can remember this most fondly. I thought, who can I take these guys to? And I took them to Bill. And Bill completely turned them around.
I think the challenge for the priest is to recognize there's a different challenge with each person you're involved with. With the person who's dying, with the lover, with the family. And I suppose the family may be a bit more difficult, especially if they're not aware of the son being gay or the daughter being gay. And they have to take a lot on board at that time. They're informed for the first time, they're informed he has a lover, they're informed that he's dying of something which they think need not have happened. So it's trying to work through all that, helping them to come to terms with who their son is, and that he's still the fine person that they knew him before they were aware of his gayness and this sort of thing. So it's helped them to feel comfortable who the son was, that he's still the same man they loved an hour or so before.
I was very impressed with his most extraordinary ordinary priesthood.
He was deeply spiritual, but he didn't throw it at you.
Bill's language about God was very, very unusual back then, and is still unusual today.
God is not a word I hardly ever heard him use. He always talked about the mystery and about coming into the mystery and the mystery embracing people. And I think one of the things he wrote was about embracing the mystery as well. So this was a very strong kind of understanding that he had, and that's what kind of drove him, I think, in a lot of his work and his ministry, because he saw the mystery not simply as some kind of divine abstraction, but the mystery of people, the mystery of people's humanity.
One thing my mother was very fair about was that we didn't have to go to church, because she said she was dragged to church 3 times a day and couldn't cope with it. From about 14 and something onwards, never bothered with it, church as such, but had always been interested in the mystery, in God, in creation, and always felt there was a oneness to everything. And then eventually I got involved with the Rosicrucian order, which led me into all sorts of things: Hinduism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, you name them, namely into all of them, spiritualism and the lot. And quite happy with them all, really, because there's something in them all. I mean, if you have the kind of belief or philosophy that there is only one God and these are all differing paths to it, and everyone finds their own way if they're given the chance.
Gay people, and it was largely gay people, gay men, by and large are totally alienated from religion. Understandably so, because religion has alienated them.
Actually, Bill never really talked about his sexuality, I have to tell you. He wasn't ashamed of it, and he certainly wasn't open about being gay, but we all knew he was gay.
Yeah. Bill had developed to the place where he had absolute confidence in the authenticity and integrity of his sexual identity, and that also was and is very unusual.
There's an increasing amount of letters asking for spiritual guidance, if that's the right word. There are people who are born, for want of a better word, naturally gay, and therefore the church should be able to have a theology for them. I think one feels it too, more and more one is working in the gay community, and also the fact that I myself am, and therefore I'm always looking at it to see what can be creative of my life in a way that may enable other gay men and women to see that they too can be creative.
He was against all prejudices, including the church. And he actually taught the church a lot of things on how people can actually coexist. Yeah. and lived together, and HIV and AIDS wasn't a threat to everybody.
One of the things that Bill struggled with was his relationship with the institutional church. He was a maverick, he was a prophet, he was an awkward character in many ways. And the church's hierarchy, the Church of England hierarchy, certainly viewed him with a great deal of suspicion.
He wasn't paid by the church. I don't think we could have accommodated him in the bureaucratic structures.
He's a bit of a maverick. He didn't fit well into church structures. I'm not sure I did either. And but Bill was a maverick, but he kept his relations going with other clergy. His friend Richie took charge of that project, and they launched an organisation called Streetwise Youth.
Yes.
And he quickly picked up that street prostitution among young males was really the big problem.
The thing that prompted that was a case, I think it was a court case, where a 14, 15-year-old boy had been assaulted, and this boy was working as a sex worker. And that really opened up Bill's eyes.
Last month, under the title Operation Stranger, police officially linked the murders of two children, 6-year-old Barry Lewis and 14-year-old Jason Swift. We showed a reconstruction of the Barry Lewis case 4 months ago. Tonight, we concentrate on Jason Swift. His body was found only 6 miles away.
Everyone was shocked, paralysed with shock, and said something's got to be done. Because the boys, the young men who came, they mostly came from care all over the country.
I think a sense that Richie was discovering the extent of the networks of abuse and the damage that was being caused, as much as Bill had become aware of the presence of people with HIV and AIDS and so on, and was responding intuitively. I think Richie was responding from his own experience as an abused person, out of which came something entirely new, Streetwise Youth.
The boys would come and say, we're looking for somewhere to sleep, something to eat. And Bill managed to get hold of enough money to buy a house in Earl's Court, in Erdley Crescent.
The extraordinary thing about Streetwise that really struck me was that it was doing something very ordinary. It was just being there for people. And it was considered more than unique. What would the word be? Groundbreaking. And that struck me that sort of, meeting people where they were and not judging, because what Streetwise did was not judge people, but work with them from where they were. So we didn't try and convert people to different sort of lives. We tried to enable them to make better choices.
At the very end of his career, end of his life, he did have a mental breakdown. I can remember all that. And it was through pure pressure as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
How much can one person take?
He had an awful psychosis. When the police picked him up and then took him to the mental health unit at the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital.
Just so thankful for his sake. He was able to leave us in a nursing home where he'd had wonderful care.
Even though all of them have suffered from dementia, some of the patients do recognize a particular sitting space is Father Bill's space. So if staff is about putting another patient there, you will hear a patient say, "Oh, that is Father Bill's." They kind of protect protects his chair, because that is the place that he sits, and because he was just such a nice person that everybody liked, you know.
I mean, you can see in his good heart the way helping us, and he always appreciate whatever we did to him and to the rest of our residents here.
If we are doing something, like maybe setting the table as an example, he will come, he will stand up. That time he walks. That was at the initial stage. He will stand up from where he was and he will come and meet us and said, "Can I give you a hand?" And it's not only one day, it's something that is ongoing.
I was playing the piano as usual and just trying to get a sense of, does he like this music or does he not like this, or, you know, where are you? So me just kind of exploring different things, and at the same time as I was really, really tired. So yeah, possibly slightly stressed music therapist. And Bill just observed me carefully in just being there. And I didn't get the sense of what he liked or what he didn't, so I wasn't sure, but just the session finished and I just kind of leaned over and said, "Thank you very much for coming." And he just kind of reached out for my hand and just suddenly said, "You're all right."
When Bill died, I was told that he wanted me to preach the funeral, at the funeral, and I didn't think anyone would be there because he'd been ill for 10 years and nobody had seen him. And when I walked in the church, it was almost full. I was very surprised, but of course he's touched so many people's lives.
I think he's someone who will be greatly missed. And I look back on that time in the 80s with a certain affection. Really, he got me through. He got me through a difficult time.
In everything that Brother Bill did with his caring for people, he involved them all in making decisions about their lives. He empowered them. He enabled them to feel that they were doing this. In this way, Brother Bill really was ahead of his time.
Warm, friendly, non-judgmental, totally compassionate. And without his saying very much, it was easy to pick that up, so that people were drawn to him.
As I said, I don't know anybody who didn't admire, respected, and loved Bill.
If you met him, once you met him, you never forgot him. And I'm sure that came across in his writing as well, because he had a way of connecting.
There's a side to Bill which, you see this deeply spiritual man. There's another side to him which was one with a wicked sense of humour, very funny, entertaining the table with all his talk and that's another memory I want to hold on to, the kind of that joyous side of Father Bill.
He was a trailblazer in every way. I mean, he trailblazed opening a little hut in the wall to serve people tea and coffee who needed it. The homeless, the inadequate, everybody who needed it. He was a trailblazer in every way.
He's left behind a splendid testimony, really. Lovely man.